This time on the laboratory, we're going to be working on a carousel from Maisto. I always forget how to pronounce the name of the model company. It's right there. It's really hard to read. M-A-I-S-T-O. Made in China. Don't know what's wrong with it other than it came with one of the horses not attached. Thought this was interesting. It says it takes DCN 9 to 10 volts. Just, you know, random whatever. So, but since it didn't come with a power supply, I have my power supply. Right now it's at 9.3. So, plug it in. I don't see an off-on switch. No, it's the volume knob. So volume knob's up. Nothing's working. It's not drawing any amperage. So let's take it apart. See if we can see what's going on. So first things, fill the power. I'm going to assume the drive mechanism's on the bottom. It's got rubber feet which aren't glued in, they're pressed in, which is nice. And of course we got some hidden screws. The screws should be loose. They don't seem to want to come out. There we go. All right. Yep, the entire drive mechanism's down here. And it doesn't look bad. I'll show you. Here's the speaker. I'm going to go ahead and unhook the speaker from the bottom so it's not flopping around. They have a little bit of a sealant around the edge, and that's holding it in. I can get that out of the way. Screws that came out. So here's the bottom. You have the power and the on-off volume knob. You have the motor with a little circuit board attached to it. You got some wires go up at the top because there's some light bulbs I can see that are inside the dome. You got a big gear, a nice transmission right here or gearbox to transfer the motor's energy into the top. Looks like it has a slip gear, so if I turn it manually, it doesn't break the gear train. The gear is on a cam and it lifts. That's kind of neat. So, we give this thing power, nothing's working. So we're going to have to examine this circuit board. Could just be the switch. Right here could be bad. It could be the power port right here. But we're going to take this thing off, which is held on with, looks like 3 screws, and get a look at the other side. This actually has a fuse, and the fuse appears to be blown. So this has a little glass fuse, and the glass fuse is popped. Let's see what it's rated for. Is a 7.8 amp 250 volt glass fuse. Very, very odd number, 7.8 amps. So I'm gonna have to go see if I got a fuse. I got lots and lots of fuses. I just have to see if I have one that's the same size in glass. I can pop the fuse in there and see if we can get this thing to turn on. This one might have been as easy as just had a blown fuse. But there's a chance that this blown fuse was caused by possibly a bad motor. Because when the motors go bad, they have a tendency of drawing excessive amounts of power, which can cause these to get really hot and then pop the filament. So, bear with me. I'm going to go and find all my fuses and see if I have a near 7.8 amp fuse. It's a lot of power for something this small. And see what I got. I shall return in just a few. Alright, I went and grabbed some fuses that are the same size. I don't have a 7.8. The closest was 7.5, but I'm all out of that same size. So let's see what I do have. That one's going to be too fat. That one's 3 1/3. That one I can't read. This one's too big. These are 2 amperes. I'm going to try a 2 amp. I'd rather sacrifice a low powered fuse than a high powered fuse just to try it and see if I get any motion or lights. I got lights and noise. It's only pulling 0.3 amps. So I think it's a bad motor that blew the fuse. So now we need to open this thing up and find out what's wrong with this motor. So I'll pull this out. It'd be nice if a lot of these came with fuses, but they don't. The glass fuses are getting harder to get, like that. But they do still make them. So this motor assembly, kind of put the circuit board in a bad spot, so we're going to have to disassemble the whole cage while it's inside the unit. I can't pull the cage out because there's 2 screws under the circuit board that's attached to the back of the motor. There we go. And that's because the circuit board is physically attached to the motor. So we'll check to see if it's a bad motor or if it's a bad circuit board that's not permitting power to get to the motor. It's got a couple of resistors and 4 capacitors. And what I'm talking about on the gears is this gear has a spring. And if you try and turn it, I don't know if you can see this, but if I turn this, you see how the gear is lifting? It's separated. Then click. It's a clutch. Basically, if it gets bound up, instead of it snapping the gear, it just jumps the teeth on the clutch. And then the spring's right on the back. That's why the back of this is so fat. It's a very special gear right there. Not a common gear in any sense of the word. And so we're going to put that back in there and put this guy back on. If something like that was used on Max or Mr. Christmas on their rotating things such as Ferris wheels, carousels, etc., mostly carnival style rides, you'd have a lot more of the rides not break when they get stuck or if something presses on them. But I doubt they'd ever modify their stuff to fit something like that. But it would be kind of interesting to see them, prolong the life of the product. So, since there's resistors on this motor, I am going to lower the power on my power supply down to about 4 volts. I'm just going to touch the motor contacts directly. And the motor does spin. At 4 volts, it's pulling half an amp. I'll bump it up to 5. At 5 volts, it's pulling 3/4 of an amp. So, am I getting nothing from the board, or is one of these components bad? So I'm going to turn it back down to about 4 volts, and I'm going to check the contacts right here on the board. Just don't touch each of the leads. Alright, she is spinning. So we're getting good contacts at the board, which means that none of these components here have failed. They don't look like they failed. There'd usually be some sort of sign, a bulge capacitor, a burnt resistor. So I'm thinking I'm not getting power through the board. So let's do some checking. Technically, if the board's bad, there is a way to bypass it on this style unit. If we have to, we can, just to make it work. So, plug it back in, turn it off, turn this back on. I'm going to set this back up for 9.5 volts, since it can run 9 to 10. Put it right in the middle. We need to pop a fuse back in. Let's try that fuse that I can't read. And fuse that I can't read, it must not work since it's not sending power to anything. Looks good. Let's try another. So pop another 2 ampere back in. And 9.5 volts is drawing 1/3 of an amp. Okay, at full power, full volume, 9.5 volts, it drops it down to about 9.2, and it's pulling just under 1/2 amp. I mean, technically that 2 amp fuse would be totally fine, but there's got to be a reason they put a 7 on there, and I think the reason is once it's back assembled, when that motor is under a load, it's going to break. So, double check this fuse, and you can check these fuses to see if they're any good by using a voltmeter, or a multimeter, sorry. I'll show you how to do that real quick, since I dropped the other original glass fuse that was broken, which is now really broken since it shattered the glass. You get a voltmeter, you put it on ohms or continuity, and for instance this fuse should be good. And you see how it says 0.2, it's a good fuse. If it was a bad fuse, it would say OL. Like that. So this is a bad fuse. So I'm going to toss it. Let's see, what's this fuse? So let's reassemble this, since the only gears that are in here are good, and put a little bit bigger fuse in, and find out if we reassemble it, if it was just a bad fuse and maybe a bad connection on the motor. The way this fits together, you cannot screw it up. There is nothing remotely square or offset about this. So it's not like you can reverse it or put it on upside down. The other thing that caused the motor maybe not to turn, which I have seen especially on the outdoor display pieces, is they sit off and they had moisture in them over the period they're not being used. So in this case would be February through November, and the moisture builds up and then causes the motor to lose conductivity between its rotor and brushes, or the armature and the brushes, and once you turn them, that little bit of rust or patina that build up in between, the oxidation wears off, and then it works fine because that motor sounds fine and it's not overdrawing power. A lot of them will overdraw power when they have a problem. Put that back in. I'm going to put that one in. It's a higher amperage since this thing's supposed to be apparently close to 8. Alright, so that clutch gear is skipping. Let's see why. Oh, I see. Clutch gear skipping because when I put this cage back on, it popped out of its hole. So, bear with me for a second. Let's get that thing back in its hole. If this was upside down, it'd be a lot easier. I'm doing it sideways. So, thought I'd have enough flex on the top cage to get it to pop back into its respective notch, but I don't. There we go. Now it's aligned up. So here we go. So she does work. I got 2 horses that are binding up right here. That should help. I just held it and you heard the clutch slip. So the clutch is working. It's only pulling a little under 1/2 amp. I think it needs a little lubrication. Yeah, definitely don't touch the deck when you're doing this. Yeah, I think all these wheels are dry too. So, I'm going to put the bottom back in real quick, and then let's take the top off and re-lubricate this thing, because I think that's another issue it's having. And then of course I got to figure out how to get the horse that popped out back in. Because there's guide wheels, and the guide wheels are really dry. So the top looks like it just has these 4 screws. So let's quickly spin these guys out and see what's underneath. Oh, sorry, 3 screws. I don't know why I said 4. Now we have a distribution board for the LEDs that are under here, 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 and here. I'm not sure what these are. These, I don't know if they're magnets or weights. Let's find out. They're magnets. Why are there magnets in here? Actually, I think they're just iron weights and they're somewhat magnetic. Okay, I know why this one fell out. The shaft is broke. Because if I put it in, it goes all the way to the bottom. It comes right out of the top. So I could just glue it in for him so it's static, it doesn't go up and down, but at least it has it. I'm trying to see, get this off, if I can get this top section to separate just enough to put a little lubrication in there. Nope. But I have an idea on how to get some lube down inside of the center. Alright, why won't your 9 back up? Well, if you have this piece, unless you have to take this off, don't. There we go. It's kind of hard to get it to line back up inside of its groove. The center shaft wobbles back and forth. But once you get it lined up, it will drop in like it just did for me. Drop the screw back in. Technically, the only time you should ever have to open this top piece up is to change or repair these LED pods that are on the bottom of the 4 arms. Right next to the counterweights. The solder pads are right here. So they're inset about 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch. Let's flip this thing upside down. Let's take out the broken horse. Of course, now that the dome's off, so this might make it easier too. If you have this piece and you have to access the bottom, take the dome off. This is some graphite grease. I can deal with outdoors better. It's not normally what I use, but because this is an outdoor piece. have to glue this horse. It keeps turning and getting caught on the other horses. There's a horse, this stud right here. The horse keeps rotating and catching the black horse on the inside. And I think that's why it keeps chattering, is because it keeps getting caught its hoof on its tail. So I might put a... No, I really can't put glue on it. It won't stop it from rotating. I have no idea how to stop this guy from turning. But the lubrication's starting to work. I'm going to put a little bit more down in the center hub where there is some rubbing. Almost out. Nope, still rubs. Ah, it's that stupid horse again. What's happening is this horse right here keeps turning in and goes under this horse. And when this horse goes down, it catches his hoof or his leg, and then it stops and it can't move. So, because this is the only horse on here that I can spin, the rest of them are, they have their stoppers. This one, the stopper's not working. So, this is posing an issue. You can, if you have this problem and you don't want to try and tear it all apart and do any of this work, push it all the way up and glue it inside the top, so that way it can't turn anymore. Might have to do it to this one because the guide on the bottom that keeps it square is broke, just like this one's broke, and I bet you that's how this got broke, because it got caught and it snapped the bottom square guide right there. So it's a very distinctive smell now. Problem with graphite lubrication, especially the stuff that's designed for leather, is it has a very strong odor. The bottom has a notch. You cannot put it on backwards. So if you have this piece, and it's not an outdoor piece, and you're having it where it's making funny sounds and jumping that gear, that's probably due to something's binding. Most likely you might have a horse that's not participating very well. This also has an alignment, which is right here, so you can't put it on wrong. I believe once I glue that one horse to the top and then glue this guy into the top as well, it won't be doing the slip anymore, since every time you hear it go rah, 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 and it stops turning, it's because it's catching on that one horse. the horse isn't turning. She's staying straight. She's starting to turn. Oh, she turned. They're good. So I'm a big Gorilla Glue guy. I know there's lots of different ones out there. But I'm going to use Gorilla Glue. And I'm going to glue this one into the top. And I like Gorilla Glue because it has this brush applicator. So I can use it to get down inside and get the sides coated. I'm going to put a little bit on the top of this. We're just going to let it sit, and then I'm going to do the same thing to this one, the one that keeps turning and jamming up the unit. I'm going to lower the horse or lift it towards the now bottom. I'm going to stick this around the edges so the bristles get inside of the top, and then I'm going to push it all the way in, and then I'm just going to smooth out the stuff that oozed out. And then I'm just going to let this sit like this for a few minutes upside down. And we'll come back to it when it's dry. Because I noticed that it does take a little bit longer to dry than some other glues. So we'll come back to it and we'll give it one final test. See what it looks like in the dark. And then it can go back to its outdoor display. For Christmas that's coming up in about, well, he'll be putting them out in November, so about 6 months, 7 months. Be back in a moment when it's dry. Alright, it's been a few minutes, it's hardened. And it's rotating. I'm going to try and lift it without wedging it. Yeah, that's the problem. When you lift it, it rubs against the edge here. See if I give it a little bit of... Yeah, this thing has to be perfectly straight up and down. Because let me turn the volume down. Because as soon as you tip it, it rubs against the plastic right there all the way around. So if you keep it flat, she works pretty good. Doesn't sound the greatest, but the music overpowers it. But that's the problem that it had. It had a blown fuse. So if they were all that easy, that would be nice. This is running at 10 volts now. So if I drop it down to 9 volts, you can see it slows down just a hair. It's not a lot. At 9 volts, it's pulling 380 milliamps, 390 milliamps. Let's just say 400 milliamps to be safe. At 10 volts, it's pulling the same. And then if I turn the volume on, 10 volts, it's 4100. At 9 volts, it's 400. So, there you go. That's 10 volts with the music, 9 volts with the music. So, that concludes the carousel repair. It does work. It's a little sensitive when you tip it because there's a lot of wear on this shaft. Let me turn the light back on. There we go. And you can see how much it moves. And when it moves off to the side, it actually wedges up against this plastic ring. The tolerance here is very tight. Also, I think the tolerance part of it is closer here than here. So I think this is starting to warp. It's plastic from being out in the sun for 2 months. Even though in the winter months it's not near as hot as normal in Arizona as it is during the summer months, but still, if we hit 80 degrees and this is out in the sun, and let's say this side's facing it, this side's going to warp. And this is the side that is really tight against this base. So I have a funny feeling some of it's distortion from being out in the sun. But most likely this wasn't a very expensive unit. I know that they make decent little model cars, but I don't believe that their animatronic stuff is as high quality as, say, Max, Department 56, etc. But nonetheless, it's working as long as it stays flat. Anything at a tip, it starts rubbing on the edges, especially this tight edge right here. And when it does, it wedges. It's got that slip gear, which is a really cool part, where if it slips, the gear uncams and goes clunk, 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 instead of burning up the motor or breaking the teeth off of all the other gears. So that does have one benefit on this cheaper unit. They used a better gear setup in their gearbox, which I think is going to prolong its life. And one other thing I thought was kind of interesting is I actually do like the bright red topper. It's kind of reminiscent of what you would find over, let's say, in Russia or that part of the world with their tops of their buildings like this. But most of them just have a basic little cap. None of them have anything as ornate. So that's one thing that does stand out on this that's different than like the Department 56 line of carousels or the Max line of carousels is it comes with a different style top. And the other reason it probably does is you have to unscrew the whole thing, whereas on those you have to pop these off. So, but anyhow, that is the info on this. And if you have this piece, how to take it apart and possibly repair it, what to look for, so on and so forth. So hopefully it was helpful and you get an idea of the cheaper versions that they still are repairable and they still do look good. And it would probably last a lot longer if it was inside your house. So until the next one, thanks for watching.